Have you ever heard of Candyman?
Weirdos, weirdos, boss girls, how are we all doing? We're back with another horror movie. So I was initially going to do the Chucky series this week, and I've thought since that instead of doing just franchises from the off, ranking them and stuff, I'd rather discuss my favourite movies from those franchises, or the decent movies, discuss them, and then build into franchise ranking. And one of the franchises that is quite easily forgotten about, apart from the first movie, is Candyman. And obviously the reason I wanted to do this week is that, unfortunately, we lost Tony Todd this week. Whilst he may be best known as playing Daniel Robitaille, aka the Candyman in these movies, he also played a lot of roles that you may not even recognise him from. You may recognise his voice, but he was often under heavy makeup or in an animation or in a booth providing audio. He also played William Bloodworth in the Final Destination movies. He was in Platoon, the Night of the Living Dead remake from 1990, and I know, some people may get pissed at me. I prefer the remake. He was in The Crow alongside Brandon Lee. He was in The Rock. He was in Wishmaster. And he also played a character called Kern in Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And I'm a Trekkie. He also did voiceover work for the Transformers movie. He was the voice of the Fallen in Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. He was Zoom in the Flash TV show that I didn't really like. He was Darkseid in the animated DC universe, and he was also the voice of Venom in Sony's Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation game. But he also turned up in The X-Files, Xena Warrior Princess, Hercules Legendary Journeys, Law & Order, Babylon 5. He turned up in Star Trek Voyager as well as the other two, as a different character. There's a metal band out there that clearly loves horror. It's called Ice Nine Kills, and Tony Todd has worked with them doing voiceover work. If you haven't checked them out, go check them out. It may be your thing. So until researching this episode, I didn't realise that the Candyman was actually based on a short story by Clive Barker called The Forbidden. In this movie, we follow along with the protagonist Helen Lyle. Now, she is married to Xander Berkeley. You'll recognise him from Terminator 2, The Walking Dead, 24. I don't know how this guy manages to play a scumbag in everything he's in. Well, the beautiful Virginia Madsen playing Helen Lyle in this does a fantastic job. And we follow her as a Chicago student, and she's completing a thesis on urban legends and folklore. This leads her to the story of the Candyman, who in the urban legend is an African-American artist, the son of a slave, who is murdered in the 19th century for falling in love with a white woman who is the daughter of a wealthy white man. And when I say murdered, oh, it's brutal. The set of this movie is obviously Chicago, and it's around a place called Cabrini Green, and it's sort of like the projects in Chicago. And it's grim. And the story goes that you say the Candyman's name 5 times into a mirror, and he will appear and kill you. Kind of like Bloody Mary, but far scarier. So Helen goes to Cabrini Green, which is obviously quite a rough area, especially for a white woman to go to. But Helen is very sceptical, something I can relate to, as on my other channel, I'm a debunker. So Helen and her friend Bernadette Walsh, they go to the project, and they repeat the Candyman's name into the bathroom mirrors 5 times, and nothing happens. So Helen wants to write this thesis on the residents of Cabrini Green, using the Candyman legend to cope with the racial inequality that they are facing. You know, there's spray paint sweets left for the Candyman, things like that in the apartments. Helen meets a neighbour of a murder victim, and she has a very young son called Anthony. This will all become relevant very soon. So Helen goes to dinner, and then she is told the story of Daniel Robitaille, aka the Candyman. And it's a true story in this movie. And obviously I briefly touched upon it, but basically, because Daniel Robitaille was a black artist, and the woman that he was having a relationship with was from a wealthy family and she was white, a lynch mob set off after him. They sawed off his right hand, didn't cut it with an axe, they sawed it off, inserted a hook into the stump, nailed the hook in, covered him in honey, and then set bees on him. Once they were done with all of that, they put him inside of a pyre, and they set him on fire. We learn in this story that the fire was built where Cabrini Green now stands. But at this point, Helen is still mostly convinced that this is just a story, and when she hears this story of a young lad that has been sliced in a public bathroom at Cabrini Green, Helen discovers that somebody may be in fact impersonating the Candyman, and she gets attacked by this very real person. He's a drug dealer. She gets a big black eye, and the makeup on it is absolutely outstanding. I'll give them that. And this person kind of takes the focus off the Candyman because he's arrested for the Candyman's murders, which depowers the Candyman a little bit. Think of him like Fred Krueger, whereas if people stop believing in him, he loses his power. So while Helen is healing, she's walking through a garage, she's sort of looking at photos up in the air, and then it's on the beginning of the intros to this new channel, where you hear Tony Todd, aka the Candyman, say the word Helen. And there is nobody, I mean nobody, that could have been better cast as the Candyman, because his voice, when that long drawn out Helen comes out, it's almost musical, but so haunting. So Candyman's a bit annoyed at Helen for discrediting him, his story. So he tells her that she has to shed innocent blood in order to make up for this. And obviously Helen is a good person. She is our hero of the movie, our scream queen, if you will. So the Candyman has this sort of hypnotic effect on Helen. Well, he full on hypnotizes her, and then Helen wakes up on a bathroom floor, drenched in blood. And this is realistic looking blood. This film is gory and nasty. If you're a fan of dogs, you may not want to watch that bit. But yeah, there's a Rottweiler that is missing its entire torso. And a baby that we met earlier in the movie, Anthony, is missing. And obviously, Helen is blamed for this, and Helen is arrested. Helen is bailed out by her husband. She goes home, realises she's captured an image of the Candyman in a photo at Cabrini Green. And then the Candyman appears, and he doesn't really stab her or rip her. He cuts her neck, and she passes out from blood loss for a while, and then when she comes to, her best friend has been murdered. And this is where the Candyman sort of excels for me, because much like Fred Krueger, he is convincing the world that this is all Helen's doing. He is unravelling Helen's world in order for her to bring back this legend of the Candyman, to undo the damage she's done. So when Helen wakes up, she's committed because her best friend has been murdered. Everyone thinks it's her. And whilst at the psychiatric hospital, Helen tries to conjure forward the Candyman to prove her innocence. And why does he come forward? Because what he does to her psychiatric's doctor is so bloodthirsty. But he also frees Helen at the same point. So Helen, after a spell in this hospital, returns home, discovers that her not-so-great husband has been sleeping with a younger student. Helen, discovering this, obviously flees and then goes to track down the Candyman, who has just upended her entire existence. She finds the Candyman at his lair, and she's gone there to rescue this kidnapped baby. And Daniel Robitaille, aka the Candyman, offers Helen immortality. If she surrenders to him, he'll let the baby go and give her immortality. And then Tony Todd, the Candyman, opens up his coat. And this is one of my favourite scenes from this movie. There's like this rotten rib cage and his bees crawling all over him. And then he goes to kiss Helen and there's bees pouring out of his mouth. This was done practically. There's no digital trickery, none of that silly nonsense in this. Tony Todd had a mouth full of bees. He was stung multiple times for this scene, and that just blows my mind. As somebody that is absolutely terrified of bees, it blows my mind that he did that for his art. Helen passes out again, and then when she comes to, the mural of the Candyman has changed. It now has Helen in the mural as the Candyman's lover. Or it may even been that his original lover had a striking resemblance to Helen, and maybe misremembering a bit there. So obviously Candyman is offering to release Anthony if Helen helps him strike fear into the residents of Cabrini Green again, because, you know, she's damaged his legend. And then we realise that there is nothing good about the Candyman left, because he goes back on his word and tries to off both Helen and baby Anthony. The way he does this is he puts them into a bonfire that the residents have built, and yeah, you can just imagine what is going to happen. But Helen is a good soul. Helen fights back against the Candyman. She skewers him with a burning stake and defeats the Candyman, but at great cost to herself, but she saves the baby. She pulls the baby out, gives the baby back to the mother, but Helen is off in one of the worst ways to go. She's burnt alive, and you see it all. And then we get the stinger at the end of the movie, and this is such a good ending. Trevor, the knobhead, is suddenly devastated at the loss of his wife despite porking one of his students. And he's looking in the mirror in grief, he's crying. It's fantastically acted by Xander Berkeley. And he's sort of rubbing his eyes and he's like, oh, Helen. Helen. And then the vengeful spirit of Helen appears, completely burnt up and all the hair's gone and stuff. And she butchers her husband, leaving his young student hysterical. And then I think maybe that's where Helen appears in the mural. Maybe I've mixed two things together there. This movie looks so good. It makes Chicago look very bleak. It makes this area of Chicago look very bleak and very grey. The sound design, not just around Tony's voice, but the music in this film, everything about it is just really unsettling. The graffiti is unsettling. There's a scene with the toilet stall just before Helen is attacked by this person that is impersonating the Candyman, and it's all just nasty, grimy, but with this supernatural chill to it. The effects on the Candyman himself are absolutely fantastic because it's not CGI, it's practical. Virginia Madsen as Helen Lyle acts her socks off. Tony Todd is brilliant. You got Xander Berkeley, who is really good at playing scumbags. I'm sure he is a lovely man in real life, but he excels at being bit of a slime ball. But even the sort of the side characters of Anne-Marie and Bernadette, those actors, none of them are falling short in this. There's not a huge cast, but everyone that is cast does such a great job throughout this film. And in with a bit of research into this movie, 200,000 bees were used in this movie. And all of the crew wore protective suits. Tony Todd put them in his mouth. Bees. Hundreds of them. Score was composed by Philip Glass, and I truly think that the score of this movie has been really underappreciated, or just not enough people watched the movie. This came out, I would have been too young to have watched this in the UK because film classifications and stuff in cinemas are a lot stricter in the UK, or they were when I was a kid. So I had to wait for this to come out on video, VHS, and the first time I watched this, it genuinely scared me. And then I went to bed and I was like, holy shit. Didn't want to look in the mirror while brushing my teeth. And I certainly didn't want to say the word Candyman. I didn't even want to think it. I was 11, I should have known a bit better, but this got under my skin. You had so many movies in the mid to late 80s that were based around these horror icons, and they slowly lose the horror edge and go into this comedy, silly aspect. And this comes out and it is bloodthirsty, it is brutal. No, it doesn't have the highest kill count, but the kills are so visceral. It is now there are sequels. There's Candyman Farewell to the Flesh. It's nowhere near as good, but still enjoyable. There's Candyman Day of the Dead, that I've seen it, but I remember nothing about it. And I don't want to rewatch it because I love this original one so much. And then there's what was advertised as a remake that turns out to not be a remake. It's a direct sequel to the original. That was made by Jordan Peele, and I don't think that film got very good reviews, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then Tony Todd's version of the Candyman appearing right at the end to let you know this is in fact a sequel, not a remake. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't quite as creepy as the original Candyman. And Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, I hope I said that right, is kind of taking over this persona of the new Candyman. There's other versions of the Candyman in this. They've all got their own backstory, but it kind of falls in line. But the original is Tony Todd. It pays homage to the original. It's a very well made film. It isn't quite as scary as the original, even though it is every bit as visceral. The gore is still there. To me, Candyman is an intelligent gothic horror movie. While it has slasher elements, there's far more to it, like the original Nightmare on Elm Street. While it's a slasher movie, it's an intelligent slasher movie. This seems a little bit more intelligent. There's There's a lot about social commentary in here, but you're not battered around the head with it like we are in this day and age. And this isn't like a silent, brutal, unstoppable killing machine. This is kind of a sexualized to a degree. You know, the voice, the look of him, the fur coat, the way he stands. This just isn't your average slasher film. When you put together the score, the cast, Tony Todd, that fantastically haunting voice, Virginia Madsen, probably the best she has ever been in anything in this movie. Fantastic effects, loads of gore, because we all love gore. If we're all honest, we love the gore. If I did a top 50 horror movies or a top 20 horror movies, this film would feature quite highly in that list. It's definitely rewatchable, and people that have never seen it that I introduce it to, my wife had never seen the Candyman. I want to put it on. Now, my wife wasn't really big into horror until we got together, and then I put on the original Nightmare on Elm Street. She's like, it's good, but it wasn't that scary. I can see why this would be scary when you're a kid. When I put on the Candyman, you could see the blanket getting folded further and further up. She's like, this is horrible. And I'm like, yes, it is. I don't know anybody that I've introduced this movie to that had never seen it before that didn't enjoy this film. And a lot of people I speak to that are fans of horror all rate this movie as one of the best. It's certainly the movie that brought Tony Todd to my attention, and then you'd see him turn up in Star Trek covered in makeup, and you're like, I know that voice. I know that voice. That's Tony Todd. But unfortunately, as I said in the beginning of this video, we did lose Tony Todd very recently. I just wanted to discuss not only one of my favourite Tony Todd movies, but one of my favourite horror movies. Something visceral, something intelligent, something different to the rest of the movies of the time. Something with a score is out of this world, and it just adds to the horror and the sense of impending doom. You always feel like Candyman is just around the corner somewhere, and he very rarely shows up. Such a well-made film. The scenes where they go back in time to show Daniel Robitaille becoming the Candyman they're nasty, but it's meant to be, because he was an innocent man, and this innocent man being killed for love has just turned him into the ultimate evil, and I think this movie is absolutely outstanding because of it. So do please let me know down in the comment section what you think of the Candyman. Does it feature quite highly in your top horror movies? Have you never seen it? Or do you prefer the remake slash sequel? As I don't think anybody would prefer Farewell to the Flesh or Day of the Dead over this one. I hope you enjoyed this video. Much love to you all. Beardo out.